Hey, welcome. We are looking at solving a linear programming problem using the simplex method, and our goal is to maximize f equals 2x plus 3y, subject to the constraints 3x plus 5y is less than or equal to 35, and 4x plus 2y is less than or equal to 28, x is greater than 0, and y is greater than 0, and we are using the simplex method to do so. So to do the simplex method, I want to convert my constraint equations into from inequalities to equalities. I'm going to introduce some slack variables. So I'm going to add, I'm going to use an S1 in here. There's different notations you might see being used, but I'm going to use S1 for my slack variables. S1 is going to take up the slack and make that from an inequality to an equality. And in the second equation, I'm going to introduce an S2. And the last thing I need to do to set things up is to rewrite my objective function. Like the two slack equations that I've got here, the equations I've got here, I want all the variables on one side and everything else on the other, and just a number on the other one. So I'm going to subtract the 2x, subtract the 3y, leave the f there, set it all equal to 0 to start with. And then I'm ready to convert this into a table. So let's draw my table down here. I want the constraints on top, so 3, 5. So that's my x column, my y column. I need an S1 column, an S2 column, and an f column. The first equation has an S1, the coefficient is 1. There's no S2 and no f in there, so I'm going to put zeros in those columns, and on the augmented side of that is the 35. And then the second equation is a 4, a 2. There's a 0 S1 in that equation. There's 1 S2. There's no f in that equation, and then 28. And then finally across the bottom, I'm going to do the same with my objective function. 2 minus 3, there's no S1, there's no S2, f is 0, and the bottom is 0 there. So there's my initial simplex table, and next we want to find the pivot. To find the pivot, we find the column by looking at the value with the largest negative number. It's technically the smallest number, but it's the largest in absolute value negative number in that bottom row. So the negative 3 is the one I'm looking for. The y column is my slack column, and then to find where my slack or my pivot column is the y column. To find the actual pivot, I want to take the values here at the end. I want to take 35 and divide it by 5, and 28 and divide it by 2. I'm going to divide by the values in that column. One of those is going to give me a 7, and the other is 14. And I want the smaller of those two as well. So I'm going to choose this 7 is the smaller of the two. So that means my pivot will be this 5 in that second row, first row, second column. So what I want to do is I want to convert that 5 into a 1 and then make the rest of that row zeros using that 5, using that 1. So I'm going to divide row 1, I'm going to take row 1 divided by 5 and put it back into row 1. That will clean things up here so that I get the get a 1 where I want it to be. So 3 divided by 5 is 3/5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 1/5, 0, 0, and then 7. For now, we'll leave the second row the same. And same with the third row. Alright, so now that we've got that situated, I want to continue working on that column. I want to make zeros. I want to turn the 2 into a 0 and the negative 3 into a 0 using row operations and working with row 1. I want to keep using that pivot to do so. So I'm going to take negative 2 times row 1, add it to row 2, put that into row 2 spot, and I'm going to take 3 times row 1, add it to row 3, and put it back into row 3 spot. So when I do those operations, whoops, Gotta keep that on the screen. So negative 2 times 3/5 is going to give me a negative 6/5. I need to add 4 to that. Negative 6/5 plus 4, well 4 is 20/5. And so when I add those two, I should get 14/5 there. So I'm going to get 14 over, whoops. First row is going to stay the same. I'm going to go to 14/5 on the second row. Actually, the first row is going to stay the same. Let me write that in here real quick. And then we will, whoops, got rid of that whole line. I just want that line. Modify as we go. So then, all right, negative 2 times 1 is negative 2, plus the 2 gives me 0. Negative 2/5 plus 0 is negative 2/5. Negative 2 times 0 plus 1 stays 1. Negative 2 times 0 plus 0 stays 0. Negative 2 times 7 is negative 7. Negative 14. Negative 14 plus 28 gives us 14 again. Alright, and then I want to do 3 times row 1 and add it to row 2. 3 times row 1 would be 9/5. And I want to add it to a negative 2. So 9/5 plus a negative 10/5 gives me a negative 1/5 in that spot. A positive 3 and a times 1 plus negative 3 will give us 0. I'm going to get 3/5 times, when I multiply it by 3 times 1/5 is 3/5 plus the 0 is 1. 3 times 0 plus 0 is going to stay 0. 3 times 0 plus 1 is going to stay 1. And 3 times 7 is 21. Plus the 0 is 21. And so I want to look at my table there. Whoops, jumped way back there. And I can see that I'm not at the ideal solution because I still have a negative here in the bottom row. I want to get rid of all the negatives here in the bottom row. So I'm going to look at which row to work with. If you take 7 and you divide it by 3/5, you end up with 35 over 3. You got to flip over that fraction and multiply when you divide. And then if I take 14 and I divide it by 14/5, I'm going to get 14 times 5 over 14. The 14's cancel, I'm left with 5. So I want to know which one of those two is smaller. 35/5 is about 11, it's a little more than 11, so that's pretty big relative to the 5. So my pivot row would be the second row, and so my pivot is going to be that 14/5 there. So my next goal is to turn that 14/5 into a 1, and then make the two values above and below that 0. So I'm going to multiply by 5 over 14 times row 2, put it back into row 2 spot. That will make that into a 1. 5/14 times 14/5 will give us a 1. So the top row is going to stay the same. 3/5, 1, 1/5, 0, 0, 7. For now that's going to stay the same. The second row, when you take that second row and multiply it by 5/14, I'm going to get 1. 5/14 times 0 is 0. 5/14 times negative 2/5, I get a negative 1/7 there. The 5's cancel, and I'll get negative 2 over 14, which reduces to 1/7. 1 times 5/14 is 5/14, 0, and then 14 times 5/14 will leave us with 5. And for now, I'm not changing the bottom row, so I will just copy it down again. Alright, and there we've got that set up. Alright, so I've got the 1. I need to make a 0 above it, and I need to make a 0 below it. So if I do negative 3/5 times row 2, add it to row 1, and if I do positive 1/5 times row 2 and add it to row 3, I'll get a 0 in row 3, that first column in row 3. That should fix my two columns for me. So let's do that math. The middle row is going to stay the same, so let me write that in there to start with. I'm going to change the row above it and the row below it. So negative 3/5 times 1 plus positive 3/5 would give us 0. Negative 3/5 times 0 plus 1 is going to stay 1. Negative 3/5 times negative 1/7 is going to give us 3/35, and I need to add 1/5 to that. So that's going to be, if I multiply by 7, I'll get a common denominator there. So 35 on bottom, and I'll have 10 on top. I'm just going to write it as 10 over 35. I know that's not reduced, but I don't think it's going to matter here because it looks like I'm going to be finishing up on this row. All right, and then 3/5 times 5/14, the 5 will cancel. I'll get a negative 3/14 there. Negative 3/5 times 0 plus 0 is 0. Negative 3/5 times 5 is a negative 3. Negative 3 plus the 7 gives us 4. Alright, and then for the bottom row, positive 1/5 times 1 plus 1/5 is going to be 0. Positive 1/5 times 0 plus 0 is 0. 1/5 times negative 1/7 is going to be negative 1 over 35. I need to add to that 3/5, and to add fractions you got to get a common denominator. So let's rewrite that as 7 over 7. So that looks like it's going to be 21 over 35. So negative 1 plus 21 is 20 over 35. And again, that can reduce, but I'm happy that it's positive, and we'll just leave it at that. Negative 1/5 times 5/14 is going to give us 1/14. And if you add that to 0, you'll get 1/14. 1/14 there. And 1/5 times 0 plus 1 stays 1. 1/5 times 5 is 1. Plus 21 is 22. So now I've got all positive numbers in the bottom, so I must be at the solution. And when I initially set this up, the first column was the x1, the second was the y, s1 and s2, and then f over there. And so it looks like lining up the numbers, x1 is a really nice column. The 1 lines up with the 5, so x would equal 5. Y has the 1 lining up with the 4, so y equals 4. S1 I want to set equal to 0, and S2 I want to set equal to 0. Those are very messy columns. They got a lot of ugly numbers in them. I want to make those values 0. And then finally F would equal 22. So we're going to get a maximum of 22. So F is going to have a maximum of 22 when x equals 5 and y equals 4.